October 18, 1943. British soldiers had just captured an Italian town called Calvi-Vecchia. They'd fought through the night, taken the town from German forces, and were now holding it with over 1,000 troops and Italian civilians still inside. They sent a radio message back to headquarters. "We control the town. Cancel tomorrow's bombing." But the message never arrived. The radio was damaged. The phone lines had been cut during the battle. And at dawn, American bombers were scheduled to level Calvi-Vecchia, unaware that it was now full of Allied soldiers. The British had one chance to stop the bombing. A Pigeon. An American carrier pigeon named G.Y. Joe. He would have to fly 20 miles to reach the airfield before the bombers took off, and he had about 20 minutes to do it. This is the story of the bird that saved 1,000 lives in a single flight. October 1943. The Allied invasion of Italy was grinding forward. American and British forces were pushing north from Sicily, fighting German defenders in every town and village. Progress was slow, bloody, and exhausting. The Germans would fortify a position, the Allies would bomb it to rubble, then infantry would move in to clear whatever was left. This was the pattern everywhere. And Calvi-Vecchia was next on the list. It was a small town, strategically unimportant on its own, but it sat on a road the Allies needed. German forces had occupied it and were using it as a defensive position. So Allied command made a simple plan. Bomb it on the morning of October 18th, then send British infantry to take whatever remained. But the British 169th Infantry Brigade had a different idea. On the night of October 17th, they launched a surprise night attack. It was risky. Night operations were chaotic and dangerous, but if they could take the town before dawn, they'd save the buildings, avoid casualties from the bombing, and maybe catch the Germans by surprise. The night attack worked. By early morning on October 18th, British forces had cleared Calvi-Vecchia. The Germans either retreated or were captured. Over 1,000 British soldiers now occupied the town, along with Italian civilians who'd been sheltering in basements during the fighting. The British commander immediately tried to radio headquarters. "We have Calvi-Vecchia. Cancel the bombing." But the radio had been damaged during the night fighting. It wouldn't transmit. He tried the phone lines. Cut. The Germans had destroyed the telecommunications infrastructure before retreating. The British were now sitting in a town that American bombers were going to destroy in less than an hour, and they had no way to tell anyone to stop it. The British had one communication method left: carrier pigeons. The Army Pigeon Service had stationed birds with forward units specifically for situations like this, when radios failed and messengers couldn't get through. The pigeons were kept in mobile lofts that travelled with the troops. The British commander found the pigeon handler and explained the situation. They needed to get a message to the American air base at Capua, about 20 miles away, before the bombers took off. The handler checked his birds. Most had already been used for other messages and were exhausted. But he had one American pigeon that was fresh and ready, number USA 43 SC 6390. The soldiers called him G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe was a blue-check cock pigeon, about 2 years old, assigned to the United States Army Pigeon Service. He'd been bred and trained in North Africa before deploying to Italy with the Allied forces. Carrier pigeons like G.I. Joe had one extraordinary ability: homing instinct. If you took a pigeon miles away from its loft and released it, the bird would fly home. Scientists still don't fully understand how pigeons navigate. They use the sun, Earth's magnetic field, landmarks, even smell. But they're remarkably accurate over distances of hundreds of miles. G.I. Joe's home was the pigeon loft at the American Air Base in Capua. He'd been brought forward to the British lines just days earlier, specifically so he could carry messages back if needed. And now he was needed desperately. The British commander wrote out an urgent message on thin paper, explaining that British forces held Calvi-Vecchia and the bombing must be cancelled immediately. The message was placed in a small aluminum capsule and attached to G.I. Joe's leg. The time was approximately 10 a.m. The bombing was scheduled for shortly after 10 a.m. The bombers might already be preparing for takeoff. The handler released G.I. Joe into the sky. The bird circled once to orient himself, then turned north and began flying toward Capua as fast as his wings could carry him. 20 miles doesn't sound like much, but for a pigeon, flying over war-torn Italian countryside, dodging whatever obstacles lay between him and home, it was a desperate race. Carrier pigeons typically fly at speeds of 50 to 60 miles per hour. In perfect conditions, G.I. Joe could cover 20 miles in about 20 to 25 minutes. But these weren't perfect conditions. He was flying over a battlefield. The air was full of smoke from recent fighting. Buildings were burning, and if there was any wind or weather interference, it could slow him down. Back in Calvi-Vecchia, the British soldiers could do nothing but wait. Some posted lookouts, watching the sky for bombers. If the American planes appeared before G.I. Joe reached the airfield, there would be no time to react. The soldiers would be killed by their own side's aircraft. At the American airbase in Capua, preparations were underway for the bombing mission. Bomber crews were getting briefed. Planes were being fueled and armed. Mechanics were doing final checks. The pilots knew the target. Calvi-Vecchia, a German-held town. They'd been told to level it. Standard operation. Nobody had informed them that the situation had changed overnight. The base had a pigeon loft, managed by handlers who received messages from birds returning from the field. Around 10:20 a.m., one of the handlers noticed a pigeon approaching from the south, flying fast. It was G.I. Joe, returning home. The bird landed in the loft, exhausted. The handler immediately saw the message capsule on his leg and retrieved it. He read the message. His blood went cold. British forces were in Calvi-Vecchia right now. He ran. The pigeon handler sprinted across the airfield toward the operations tent, waving the message. He found the officer in charge of the bombing mission and thrust the paper at him. "Sir, British troops are in the target zone. The mission has to be cancelled." The officer read the message, confirmed its authenticity, and immediately ordered the mission scrubbed. Bombers that were about to take off were grounded. Pilots who were climbing into cockpits were ordered down. The bombing of Calvi-Vecchia was cancelled. The official report later stated that G.I. Joe had flown approximately 20 miles in 20 minutes. That's an average speed of 60 miles per hour, flying continuously, navigating over unfamiliar terrain in wartime conditions. It was an extraordinary performance, and it saved over 1,000 lives. The British soldiers in Calvi-Vecchia had no idea how close they'd come to being killed by American bombs. They waited in the town, watching the sky nervously, until finally a messenger arrived with confirmation. The bombing had been cancelled. They were safe. When the British commander learned that a pigeon had delivered the message just in time, he was stunned. He'd sent the bird as a desperate last hope, not really expecting it to work, but G.I. Joe had made it. The bird had flown faster than anyone expected, arrived exactly when needed, and prevented a catastrophic friendly fire disaster. The story spread quickly through Allied forces in Italy. A pigeon had saved an entire brigade. It was the kind of story soldiers loved, proof that even in modern mechanized warfare, sometimes the simplest solutions worked when technology failed. G.I. Joe became famous. He was featured in military newspapers and newsreels. The British, who'd been saved by an American pigeon, were particularly grateful. After the war, the story reached England, where an organisation called the People's Dispensary for Sick Animals was awarding the Dickin Medal, essentially the animal version of the Victoria Cross, to animals who'd shown exceptional courage in wartime. On August 15, 1946, G.I. Joe was awarded the Dickin Medal for the most outstanding flight by a United States Army pigeon in World War II. The citation specifically mentioned his delivery of the message that prevented the bombing of Calvi-Vecchia and saved the lives of at least 1,000 British soldiers and Italian civilians. G.I. Joe lived for many years after the war. He was retired from military service and became an ambassador for the Army Pigeon Service, appearing at events and ceremonies. He died in 1961 at the impressive age of 18. Carrier pigeons typically live 10 to 15 years, so G.I. Joe enjoyed a long retirement. His body was preserved through taxidermy, just like Sergeant Stubby's. Today, you can visit G.I. Joe at the U.S. Army Communications and Electronics Museum at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. He's displayed in a glass case, wearing his Dickin Medal, commemorating his single heroic flight on October 18, 1943. There's something profound about G.I. Joe's story. The Allied invasion of Italy involved hundreds of thousands of soldiers, thousands of aircraft, tanks, artillery pieces, all the machinery of modern war, millions of dollars of equipment, sophisticated technology, elaborate planning. And yet, when it mattered most, when 1,000 lives hung in the balance and all the modern technology had failed, the radio was broken, the phone lines were cut, there was no time to send a messenger. It came down to a pigeon, a bird that cost nothing, required no fuel, needed no maintenance except food and water. A bird using instincts developed over millions of years of evolution. G.I. Joe flew 20 miles in 20 minutes and changed the course of October 18, 1943, for over 1,000 people who would have died without him. British soldiers who went home after the war, Italian civilians who survived the occupation, all because one bird flew fast enough. The next time someone dismisses an idea as too simple, or too old-fashioned, or not technological enough, remember G.I. Joe. Sometimes the simplest solution is the one that works. G.I. Joe is one of many remarkable animal heroes of World War II. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button. It helps more people discover these forgotten heroes. And here's a question for you. Could a pigeon save 1,000 lives today? We have satellites, drones, instant communication. But what happens when all that technology fails? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you want more stories like this, the forgotten soldiers, the unlikely heroes, the moments that changed everything, subscribe to Forgotten Front and hit the bell so you don't miss the next video. What other animal heroes should I cover next? Sergeant Reckless the horse, Judy the POW dog, or should we go back to human stories? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're ever near Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, go see G.I. Joe. He's been waiting there for over 60 years, still wearing his medal, still remembered as the bird who refused to let 1,000 people die. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.